Hi again. We're in Dorothy Sayers' Creed or Chaos. She's been detailing how several dogmas have been basically misunderstood or even lost to the common man. Even men who were churchgoers didn't understand the doctrines of God, Christ, and man. That's what she's dealt with already. Now she goes on to the doctrine of sin as taught by the Bible and as commonly understood in the England of 1940. She says that this doctrine of man leads naturally to the doctrine of sin. One of the really surprising things about the present bewilderment of humanity is that the Christian church now finds herself called upon to proclaim the old and hated doctrine of sin as a gospel of cheer and encouragement. The final tendency of the modern philosophies, hailed in their day as a release from the burden of sinfulness, has been to bind man hard and fast in the chains of an iron determinism. The influences of heredity and environment, of glandular makeup and the control exercised by the unconscious, of economic necessity and the mechanics of biological development, have all been invoked to assure man that he is not responsible for his misfortunes and therefore not to be held guilty. Evil has been represented as something imposed upon him from without, not made by him, free from within. That is, made by him from within. The dreadful conclusion follows inevitably that as he is not responsible for evil, he cannot alter it, even though evolution and progress may offer some alleviation in the future. There's no hope for you and me, here and now. I well remember how an aunt of mine, brought up in an old-fashioned liberalism, protested angrily against having continually to call herself a miserable sinner when reciting the litany. Today, if we could really be persuaded that we are miserable sinners, that the trouble is not outside us but inside us, and that therefore, by the grace of God, we can do something to put it right, we should receive that message as the most hopeful and heartening thing that can be imagined. Needless to say, the whole doctrine of original sin will have to be restated in terms which the ordinary modern man, brought up in biology and Freudian psychology, can understand. These sciences have done an enormous amount to expose the nature and mechanism of man's inner dislocation, and ought to be powerful weapons in the hand of the church. It is 1,000 pities that the church should ever have allowed these weapons to be turned against her. Now she moves on to her fourth point, judgment. Much the same thing is true of the doctrine of judgment. The word punishment for sin has become so corrupted that it ought never to be used. But once we have established the true doctrine of man's nature, the true nature of judgment becomes startlingly clear and rational. It is the inevitable consequence of man's attempt to regulate life and society on a system that runs counter to the facts of his own nature. In the physical sphere, typhus and cholera are a judgment on dirty living, not because God shows an arbitrary favoritism to nice, clean people, but because of an essential element in the physical structure of the universe. In the state, the brutal denial of freedom to the individual will issue in a judgment of blood, because man is so made that oppression is more intolerable to him than death. The avaricious greed that prompts men to cut down forests for the speedy making of money brings down a judgment of flood and famine, because that sin and avarice is the spirit in the spiritual sphere runs counter to the physical law of nature. We must not say that such behavior is wrong because it does not pay, but rather that it does not pay because it is wrong. As T.S. Eliot says, a wrong attitude toward nature implies somewhere a wrong attitude towards God, and the consequence is an inevitable doom. And now Dorothy Sayers goes on to her fifth point, matter. At this point, we shall find ourselves compelled to lay down the Christian doctrine concerning the material universe, and it is here, I think, that we shall have our best opportunity to explain the meaning of sacramentalism. The common man labors under a delusion that for the Christian, matter is evil and the body is evil. For this misapprehension, St. Paul must bear some blame. St. Augustine and Hippo a good deal more, and Calvin a very great deal. But so long as the church continues to teach the manhood of God and to celebrate the sacraments of the Eucharist and of marriage, no living man should dare to say that matter and body are not sacred to her. She must insist strongly that the whole material universe is an expression and incarnation of the creative energy of God, as a book or a picture is the material expression of the creative soul of the artist. For that reason, all good and creative handling of the material universe is holy and beautiful, and all abuse of the material universe is a crucifixion of the body of Christ. The whole question of the right use to be made of art, of the intellect, of the material resources of the world is bound up in this. Because of this, the exploitation of man or of matter for commercial uses stands condemned, together with all debasement of the arts and perversions of the intellect. If matter and the physical nature of man are evil, or if they are of no importance except as they serve an economic system, then there is nothing to restrain us from abusing them as we choose. Nothing, except the absolute certainty that any such abuse will eventually come up against the unalterable law and issue in judgment and destruction. In these, as in all other matters, we cannot escape the law. We have only the choice of fulfilling it freely by the way of grace, or willy-nilly by the way of judgment. I wanted to link to James Orr's Doctrine of Sin. That great Presbyterian minister spoke very eloquently on this subject, so I put that video up. And also a video we did on Acts 17. What was it that Paul preached? I mean, she put some blame on Paul here. St. Paul must bear some blame for the delusion that the modern man has that matter is evil and the body is evil. Well, I can't really blame Paul. All I can really say is that Dorothy Sayers is somewhat slightly misreading Paul, I think. And I think misreading Calvin a lot. But anyway, that's her opinion. So, Acts 17, what does Paul preach to the Athenians, the philosophers of the center of learning in the ancient world? He preaches the day of judgment, and that a man will be the judge.